Thanks very much, Peter. Well, good morning. Like yesterday, I can't see you all. All I can see is bright light. Check this. Yep, we're in action. Well, good morning. I would like to welcome you all here today to the NTCA Annual Conference. I'm proud to report to you all that following our 39th Annual General Meeting held yesterday afternoon, that I remain the President of the NTCA for one more year, with my term expiring at the next AGM at what will be the Association's 40th year, after commencing in April 1984. I can tell you that your association is today larger and stronger and carries more influence than ever before. The NTCA is a fiercely apolitical association that will stand up for ourselves to bureaucrats and politicians of all walks and all parties. As we gather here on the traditional lands of the Larrakia people, which today thousands of people from all over the world and from all walks of life call home, I would like to welcome all of the association's members who are here today and thank you for travelling such long distances to be here. I would also like to thank our guests who have travelled long distances to be with us. Some of you have come by car, plane, helicopter, and I am told even by airboat across flooded streams. Welcome. And to begin our formalities this morning, I would like to especially welcome Senator the Honourable Murray Watt, Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. Thanks for coming along, Senator. Senator the Honourable Malarndirri McCarthy, the Honourable Luke Gosling, Member for Solomon, Senator Jacinta Price, the Honourable Paul Kirby, Minister for Business and Agribusiness and Fisheries, Mr Joshua Burgoyne, Shadow Minister for Agribusiness and Aquaculture here in the NT, Mr Bill Yan, Shadow Minister for Health, Parks and Rangers, Mr Steve Edgington, MLA, Shadow Minister for Mining and Industry, Consul for the Republic of Indonesia, Mr Gulfan Afero, Professor Wiku and Dr Manawera of the Indonesian Veterinary Association, and Dicky Adewoso, who's been associated with the NTCA since about 1990, I reckon. You're starting to go as grey as I am, Dicky. Mr Alan Beckett, Chair of Meat and Livestock Australia, David Galvin, Chair of Australian Livestock Exporters Council, John McKillop, Chair of RMAC, the Red Meat Advisory. I would like to acknowledge our NTCA Life members, Mrs Terry Underwood, OAM, Mr Ian McBean, Mr Alan Andrews, Mr Roy Chisholm, Miss Tracy Hayes, Mr Rowan Sullivan, and a special welcome to former NTCA Presidents Mrs Val Dyer, Roy Chisholm, Rowan Sullivan, Tom Stockwell. They've got my name down here. I'm not former yet. Other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I make an apology if I've left your name out, and it may be because I've made a mistake, or it may be because you're not as important as you think you are. We'll work that out later. Before we move into the core of my address, I would like to make mention of the flooding that started the year in the Kimberley and has now moved across the north and extended across the VRD and the Barkly as far as Queensland. For some producers, especially those who have borne the brunt of it, this flooding can be devastating. To them and to those here today, I extend my and the Association's sympathies and reiterate the offer I made to the KPCA CEO earlier in the year, an offer I extend to all. If there is anything we can do to help, please ask. There would not be a member of the NTCA that has not at some time suffered from a flood or a fire or some other disaster that has left them reeling and wondering what the point of continuing was. But as we know, as you all know, you will rebuild. I have no doubt you will rebuild stronger. We are known for our resilience. And speaking of resilience, Peter Hughes told me yesterday morning whilst the waters of the Georgina floated through the Lake Nash compound at 1.5 metres in depth, Peter said, "Oh, well, it could be worse." It would also be remiss of me not to mention how hard 2022 was for so many. In a year where we lost Life member and founding member of the association, John Dyer, Life member Jimmy Hayes, and industry friends Willow, Normie, and I'm sad to say some others. I would like to send my condolences to their families, both here with us today and away. Their loss will be felt particularly sharply by many today, and while gone, they are not forgotten. I would also like to send my and the association's regards to former President David Warriner. He has been having some health issues over the past month and is not amongst us here today. Our best wishes are with him and his family, and we hope to see him back up and running for next year's conference and wish him well on his path to recovery. With that noted, let me begin the business of the President's address for 2023 and to begin the discussion of the business of the NTCA. For people who live many thousands of kilometres apart, this event is one of the few times a year that we are able to come together to share our beliefs, our fears, our hopes and our aspirations. My role here as we come together is to give voice to this. Many of you know of the legacy of the President's address. It is not just to the content of this address, but the way in which it is delivered, that serves as a tradition handed down from the President to President. The annual address serves as a platform to honestly and openly discuss the views of the industry and to leave no one left wondering where we stand on issues both big and small. I have never been accused of not speaking my mind based on the facts that I believe. And today, as I stand in the shadows of the great voices for our industry that have come before me, I can assure you all that this is a legacy that we take seriously. Hopefully, I will have finished speaking before you want to finish listening. My role here today as the elected representative is to outline what the association stands for, what we are willing to fight for. The President's address comes down to one thing and one thing only: to be a platform from which our association draws its purpose. The NTCA is unique in Australia. We represent 90% of pastoral businesses in the Territory, both Australian-owned and foreign, family-operated and corporate, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike. The thing that unites us is our love for this land, for our cattle, our families, our people, and our industry. The role of the NTCA is both simple and incredibly complex: to advance and protect the pastoral industry of the Northern Territory. And today my address will be reflective of these dual roles. I will begin with the way in which we must protect our industry as well as share our vision for how it may be advanced. The Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry and Emergency Management, Minister Murray Watt, joins us today, and I welcome him sincerely. Murray Watt is a proud Queenslander, and I guess if you can't be from the Northern Territory, then Queensland will be the next best. It is a privilege to be given the opportunity to hear from him directly today, as we will a little later on. I would encourage you all to engage respectfully with the Minister, and equally I would encourage you, Minister, to speak with candour, as you are amongst friends here today. I know I speak for many here when I offer you our sincere thanks for the work you did on behalf of the industry last year in strengthening biosecurity systems and investing so heavily in support for Indonesia. I would also like us all to note the quick responses organised by the Minister to have the Defence Force become involved in the support of flooded, isolated communities, and I know that work is ongoing. Tying the two portfolios of ag and emergency management together, strangely enough for some reason, go pretty well hand in hand. So, Minister, and all of you, Welcome to our territory, our land, our people, the real Australia. Nicole informs me, a Brahman breeder, that these are Herefords. While I am pleased to greet you here today in the spirit of friendship, Minister, I would note that our friendship does not come without a price. I cannot speak for those in the cities or those in southern Australia, but here in the north, our friendships are most often built on respect, on honesty, on integrity, and when disagreement inevitably raises its head, it is often from those truly committed and passionate to these principles. So I have no doubt, Minister, that during your tenure we will disagree over policy, over practice, over politics and other issues we may each consider pressing. But since being appointed to the role, you have proven yourself a rare thing indeed, a politician of character and a man of his word, a direct speaker who does not seem to dabble in what I call poly-speech, a special language undertaken by politicians not only unsure of their fundamental responsibilities and their job, but their roles in it and who elected them to it. And while I do not look forward to disagreeing with you on matters of policy, and today I will, there is a part of me that knows that these conflicts will be necessary and come at a time in our society where they are called for now more than ever. Prior to the invention of social media, Twitter, and the cancel culture that seems so pervasive currently, it was recognised the importance of having a good disagreement. So often it is in conflict that we are best able to achieve the strongest outcome. There are few things I find more dangerous, more frightening, more terrifying than a stupid idea left unopposed. While in today's world, I would venture that few, if any, decisions are able to go through to the keeper unassailed, it is in the crucible of conflict that we are so often able to show our best selves. And so to you all here today, and to you, Minister, I say I look forward to a long relationship built on trust and the brutality of our shared honesty. I know a bit about brutal honesty. That's when your wife asks you if she looks good in this dress, and you say, no, you don't. And then you learn something about unintended consequences as well. Unintended consequences is the outcome of a purposeful action that is not intended or foreseen. Unintended consequences is somewhat of an underlying theme for my address today, and I will return to it again later. In all sincerity, it is a tradition of the NTCA to provide time for those who disagree with us, the courtesy of listening to them and the consideration of their position. I think this is only reasonable, as I know we would ask only the same of those who hold different beliefs to us. In fact, as a direct speaker, I am in favour of the opportunity to express one's opinion. We do not have to agree with what people say, but I vehemently believe in their right to say it. Having the fundamental right to freedom of speech means sometimes having to hear that which you may not agree. A former Prime Minister said that freedom of speech carries with it a responsibility to those that exercise it, to do so in a moderate and tolerant fashion and not convert the language into a vehicle for insensitive and intolerant language. So today we will be hearing from some with which we will agree, some with which we will disagree, some with which we will think of fondly and some from which we will not. Regardless, it is my honest hope that we will emerge better for it. Now with that, what Tom Stockwell will likely tell me later, a fairly generous preamble behind us, I will move to the first issue of the day. That being the federal government intended ban of the live sheep industry. Last year, I clearly stated the position of the NTCA regarding the phase out of the sheep trade at the Live Exchange Conference held here in Darwin. I stated it publicly and plainly because that is our way. It is important to us that our position on this is clear. I said, the policy Federal Labor has regarding the export of sheep from Western Australia is wrong, and in our opinion will end up doing more harm than good. The harm will be in the whole of the supply chain and to all those people who are involved not just directly but indirectly with this trade. As farm incomes plummet, the land values will also. What do the banks say about this? If you are the CEO of a major bank and you have these sheep properties mortgaged on your books, then look out. It is my belief that the ban of sheep exports has little to do with sheep, but more the culture of this government. One that says it is okay to close down the income streams of law-abiding citizens of the bush. Not one based on a skerrick of scientific fact, but based on some promise made in 2018 when live export emotion was running high. In fact, due to the statements made, the industry got off its collective backside and cleaned up its act. It put in place systems, processes and regulations that have turned it into a world-leading animal supply chain. This reminds me of the cotton industry, an industry that 25 years ago was not good enough, an industry with practices that resulted in organochloride contamination of our beef, caused by endosulfan on fed cotton trash, an industry fraught with problems and with scant regard to environment and processes, was threatened by government and has cleaned up its act to be the sustainable and environmental success story it is today. Today's government can learn from this. It is actually the threat of closure that has changed this live sheep industry. The Labor government should be singing from the rooftops about its part in how they forced this industry, which was not good enough, to bring about sustainable change. This is the ladder that government can use to walk down from their position. For us, it is an unimpeachable truth that losing the live sheep trade will do nothing but empower those who do not just oppose live export, but livestock farming in general. Those who would seek an end to our livelihoods because they believe farming and the people who do it to be evil, to be wrong, to have outlived our utility for modern society. Which industry is next? Cattle? Pigs? Chickens? Or will we see fertiliser and glyphosate banned as in Europe? Maybe we need to flood the streets with tractors as we have seen at Brussels. This is not a fight that we started, but one that was picked against us. As so often is the case, we have been called on again to lead an action that is not of our making. Unfortunately, in this circumstance, it is the government who has once again picked this fight with us by listening and acting largely on the opinions of the uninformed. In honesty, no one should be surprised by this. Labor has gone to 2 elections making this commitment. They have plainly and openly committed to this policy and have made a commitment to implement the phase-out in an orderly manner that seeks to mitigate harm to producers and our trading partners alike. But it will not. Government will not be able to mitigate all harm, and real people will suffer real loss. So I would ask you, Minister, why is it that the government won't change their mind on this election promise when we have already seen movement around other commitments made during the election campaign? Why is it that this remains such a strong commitment when not based on science or reality? What consideration has government given to the unintended consequences of this decision that for many of us is the main area of concern? I would wager that they are either ambivalent or ignorant of these risks, despite the warnings that have been given by our industry. 25 peak industry groups, of which we are one, have signed a letter stating, amongst other things, that the ban represents a red line that cannot be crossed, and we will never support legitimate agricultural industries being closed for political reasons or to suit activist agendas. I can assure you, Minister, that 25 disparate agricultural groups agreeing on anything together is historic. But we should not be worried. In the announcement of the policy to phase out the live sheep industry, both the Prime Minister and Minister Watt have clearly and publicly stated that this is not a policy that will be replicated to the cattle trade, that this is a policy meant only for the export of sheep to the Middle East, and that a proper process will be followed. So I and these 25 industry groups should get off our collective high horse and let him out to pasture, because now we have a panel. Minister Watt has announced a 4-person consultative group to consult on how best to shut down this trade. Warren Snowden, ex-Labor politician, is on this committee. So is the past CEO of the RSPCA and animal rights campaigner, Heather Neal, as well as WA farmer and agricultural identity, Sue Middleton. The chairman is Philip Glyde, who chaired the Murray-Darling Basin Authority and should have learnt something about conflict doing that job. This committee must look at ways to transition and change the way this market sector carries out its business. But the problem now is you cannot build a change process without trust. And now the entire ag sector doesn't trust a government that just trades them off for inner city votes. The Minister has not asked the committee to see if the trade should be shut or not, because he has stated it will be closed. Decision is made. If you are in WA and you grow and export sheep, the government has just shut your market. Interestingly, I see a great deal of integrity in how the Minister announced this. At least we're dealing with someone with the courage of his convictions and the fortitude to say the hard things and not dilly-dally about. But don't sit there and tell the industry that they can process these sheep. If they could, they would already be doing it. Processing capacity is shut down in WA. Processors can't get workers. Capacity is at an all-time low. And anyway, if you only have one market to sell to, the grower will be shafted. Minister Watt told me, man to man, that he would not be seeking to close the live cattle trade after the closure of the sheep trade. I have already stated that I reckon the Minister is a good bloke. That is what can only be described as high praise in these parts. He has told me that Prime Minister Albanese said the cattle trade won't be pursued. I don't believe Mr Albanese, and why would I? Why should we? This is a Prime Minister whose Chief Agriculture Advisor was one of the leaders of the campaign to close our businesses in 2011, and who has publicly stated they believe all mainstream animal farming is inherently cruel. This is the Chief Agricultural Advisor to the Prime Minister. I believe, though, that Murray Watt believes what he is telling me. But let me say to you, both Minister Watt and I have a boss that pays our salary, that helps feed our family. And when my boss says go chop the wood, I go chop the wood. If the Minister's boss says go close the cattle trade, what do you think will happen then? I personally think Murray Watt doesn't believe closing the sheep trade is the best policy. He knows the science. He knows this is not a good decision. We do not know the argument he has already run to his boss or his cabinet saying this just isn't good policy. I trust that he has, because as an ag minister, the sheep trade is about to be closed on his watch. But his boss has said, go chop the wood. We, the NTCA, have clearly and publicly stated our opposition to this. A reasonable question would be to ask why. Why is this the position of the NTCA? Why are we involving ourselves in the affairs of others? We don't have sheep. We may have Herefords. And southwestern Australia is a long way away. These are fair questions, the answer to which should not surprise any of our members, because we know that activists will not stop there. And we know that this government listens to activists and will be forced to do deals with minority parties during this term of government. The Greens' Marine Faruqi said recently that we will not stop at just the live sheep industry. Cattle are next. These are the sorts of people the Labor government has gotten into bed with on this policy and others. This sets a very dangerous and more than concerning precedent by this government. I'm not even sure whose policy this is. We have a NT Labor government supporting live export. We have a Queensland Labor government supporting live export. We have a WA Labor government supporting live sheep export, and a national Labor government saying they don't. So let me remind you all of how we got here. On the 8th of April 2018, 60 Minutes aired footage provided by Animals Australia evidencing sheep suffering from appalling conditions on board a ship carrying them to the Middle East. Following the airing of the 60 Minutes episode, both sides of politics moved quickly to express their outrage and call for much needed reform. The next day was the 9th of April 2018. Bill Shorten, then leader of the Labor Party in opposition, publicly stated Labor's position regarding the trade. He said, and I quote, "The images we saw last night were unacceptable. We will work with government because this issue is above politics." Weeks later, as the government launched immediate reviews of the trade, Labor maintained their support for the industry, with Mr Shorten again publicly stating on the 19th of April, "We are absolutely open to working with government on bipartisan reforms, and we believe these reviews are unlikely to conclude the northern summer trade is sustainable, but we will honour our commitment to await its findings." Shortly after this, Labor backflipped on their promises and broke their word. Without consulting the industry or even providing any forewarning, Joel Fitzgibbon announced that it was now the position of Labor that, if elected, they were committed to banning the export of sheep to the Middle East. No science, no analysis, no engagement. What they said they would do and what they did do proved vastly different. This position was announced 9 days prior to the independent scientific reviews commissioned by the government being completed and published, reviews that confirmed that with changes the industry would be able to continue safely. Labor had caved to political pressure and changed their position, without the science that would inform a decision as to whether this industry could continue or what harm would be caused if it was not. It can be that easy, that quick. Over a matter of days and weeks, the jobs of those in rural areas can be decided by those who seek political gain and aren't actually interested in what is right. But we've seen this before. We've heard it before. And not just in 2011, but time and time again. The Labor Party are somewhat predictable in these decisions. It was not just the decision that was made, but the way it was made and who it was made by. Today, 9 of the current ministers of government, the majority of whom were also in the shadow cabinet in 2018 to ban sheep, were also ministers in the Gillard government in 2011 that banned cattle. I want to talk about the live cattle class action. Andrew Gill from Minter Ellison is here today and welcomes people engaging with him. He set up a room and you can have a chat with him about the live cattle class action. It took us 2,048 days to have the verdict of the Brett Cattle case handed down, and today marks the 1,017th day following the verdict, and we are yet to receive our court-ordered compensation. As many of you in this room will be claimants to this class action, you will be aware that the federal government is fiddling with the class action at the moment, trying to undo that which was laid down by the courts and continuously asking us to reprove that which they already know to be true. While some would put this down to the machinations of bureaucracy, I am inclined to take a different view. My inclination is to suggest that this is deliberate. Despite repeated governments announcing that they would be model litigants, there are those within government who do not want to see this compensation paid, that there are some who are dragging their feet and slowing the process deliberately. In their minds, this is the case that should not have been lost, that should have been appealed, that justice should have been denied us, or at least delayed as long as possible, as it is being delayed to this day. I would go as far to say that if this is the case, it is an appalling breach of the constitutional requirements of a democratic government, upon which the judgment of the federal court is absolute and binding, even on the executive and legislature. In this country, no one is above the law. If it has taken us 3,000 days to get here, how much longer will it take? It is the sad and unfortunate reality that many of those who first joined the class action are no longer with us. They're gone. Many of those who were so pained by the actions of 2011 will go to their graves never feeling the relief of justice, the privilege of an apology, or the relief of compensation. They will die waiting. And to me, this is unconscionable. To go to your grave waiting, while being now asked to give advice to government on how the same trade can be banned by the same people for the same reasons, only in a different state, to me is unjust. And do not ask us or expect anyone in industry to take part in a process designed to inflict the same hardship on others, while we are still waiting to receive our recompense for past crimes. It is a moral obligation of those sitting around that table today in Canberra, who were sitting around that table in 2011, to do everything they can to ensure that this past wrong is made right. I would ask you, Minister, do not delay us justice any longer. Tear down this wall. Pastoral protections. Minister, you may be relieved to know that I'm switching tact. But don't worry, I'm not going away. Last year at the NTCA conference, I called on the government to show confidence in implementing the regulatory framework set out by the Pepper inquiry and provide assurance to the industry that the recommendations made by Justice Pepper were fully implemented as law. I stand before you today in full knowledge that many of the recommendations have now been made law and the protections laid out by them are nearing implementation. While I can truthfully say we are not completely happy with the manner in which this has been done, the work by many within the government has been profound, and there are those who deserve to be recognised for their contribution. With us today are Sean Drabs and James Pratt from the Department of Industry, Tourism and Trade. Their hard work on this issue and others over the past 12 months deserves special mention, and I would like to thank them for it. And while I'm thanking latte sippers, I would like to mention Chief Decaf Almond Milk Cappuccino with a lemon twist sipper, Luke Bowen, who has decided to rejoin the working class by taking up the position as CEO of the newly formed Cattle Australia. It's instant coffee for you now, brother. I want to thank Luke for his work as the Deputy CEO of the Department of Industry, Tourism and Trade. His fine work on behalf of government and industry helped bolster our biosecurity and many other achievements whilst in the chair. Our wider industry wishes you good luck with Cattle Australia, Luke. It's their gain, believe me. Returning to the issues surrounding the resources sector, we now move to a new phase in the development of the gas industry, which is the actual regulation of it. the Territory Government must commit to attending gas wells across the regions and visiting exploration and production site wherever they may be, frequently, as often as can be. The repercussions of contamination of subterranean water basins will be felt across the north. We must never allow this to occur. We have been told by government that this industry can proceed safely with PEPA recommendations in place. Thousands and thousands of people and millions of our animals depend on this to be true. The NTCA has lost plenty of skin in this fight, and we have emerged mostly triumphant, yet battered and bruised from the process. But we respect the science as presented to us, and we are unashamedly pro-development of the NT. What is good for the goose must also be good for the gander. The NTCA were successful in working with government to get access protections in place for the petroleum and gas sector. But in the Territory, we have a habit of killing the chickens just to harvest the eggs. And this as a newly invigorated minerals sector is driving all over our farmyard. The minerals sector now needs to join, as their counterparts did, in ensuring equitable access protections for pastoralists are in place as we stand at the new dawn of rare earth and critical mineral exploration in the NT. So for the Senior Executive Director of the Mines Branch, put the kettle on. Will and I are coming for a visit. Pastoralists are not opposed to minerals exploration and welcome the development that it can bring, but only if we are engaged in respectful and equitable negotiations, as has been provided for in the legislation now regulating the gas industry and the protection of pastoral interests. Where exploration companies see soil, trees, fences, cattle, water points, access roads, and at times pastoralists as being hurdles that are in the way of their business, these are the very things that give our business life. It is a difficult reality that these are the elements that they need to remove to get to their business, while these are the very things that allow us to exist. To ensure that we can coexist, the law must recognise us as equals and not as one industry subservient to the other, as the NTCA has been saying for almost 40 years. For too long, government has seen themselves as being in the business of mining and as having to tolerate the business of pastoralism. In an age where the next resources to be extracted will be carbon and biodiversity credits, a new era of pastoral mining is beginning. To advance our industry, we must be the ones holding the canary. So the NTCA calls on the NT government to introduce the same level of protections for pastoralists from minerals exploration as they have for the energy sector. I'll need a drink of water for this next bit. I would like to talk about advancement of Indigenous policy. It seems that aspects of so many of the problems we have today come from trust deficits. As I stand here asking the Territory Government to provide their cast iron guarantee that no ills will come from the emergence of a gas industry, I admit my fears far outweigh my confidence. This is because I believe on any number of fronts, I am sorry to admit, the NT Government has work to do in providing their assurances to us all. There are too many laws in these lands that fall to pastoralists to enact. Too often it falls to us to be both the regulator and the regulated, without the luxury of protection by the government when our livelihoods are threatened. The protection of sacred sites in the Northern Territory by pastoralists is evidence of this. There would not be any Territory producer in this room today that would not be able to tell you where on their property sacred sites occur and what they do to protect them. Some of us have even been entrusted by traditional owners with the knowledge of what these sites are for and why they are culturally significant. It has always been understood that the protection of sacred sites allowed for a balance to exist between us and traditional owners. As long as we were sensitive to the cultural requirements around these sites and supported the protection of them, then we were able to conduct our business. This is what the law of the NT is to provide, the practical balance and protection of the sites, and to give clear guidance to the landholder around what may and may not be done at these sites. We accept that these sites on our properties where we cannot allow, there are some sites on our properties where we cannot allow women, as they are sacred for men's business. Equally, we accept there are sites for women's business that men cannot go. There are waterholes and ridgelines that have been meeting grounds for millennia, where artefacts lay on the ground that must not be disturbed. There is a power to these places that must be respected. However, the goalposts have shifted recently, and there are now new players coming onto the field. The environmental lobby have co-opted others as a means of stopping development, not as a means of protecting Indigenous culture and heritage. It is a cynical practice to weaponise the sacred site regulations in an attempt to shut down legal pastoral development and much of any other development in the NT, to declare whole swaths of land and waterways a site of significance. These sites have never been declared or documented before. These sites and their size are multiplying. Coincidentally, it appears, in conjunction with development applied for. And why? Well, I'll tell you. There is no ability for pastoralists or anyone else to argue about the existence of a sacred site. If we are told it is, then it must be so. My concern is that environmental activists are using cultural sites to block development rather than the protection of the sacred site. The end result is that many of us now live in fear of being labelled a destroyer of heritage or a desecrator of culture, simply for conducting pastoral activities as we always have. The Pastoral Lands Act states the right of a pastoralist to the quiet freedom to conduct his pastoral activity. And despite obtaining the myriad of permits from government giving permission to development, we are increasingly facing these accusations. The Sacred Sites Act was established, as is included in the preamble to the legislation, to afford a practical balance between the protection of Indigenous cultural heritage and the aspiration of all peoples of the Territory for their economic, cultural and social advancement. It was not established as a tool to be used to threaten, intimidate and demean the pastoral families living on the land. It was never intended that it be used to stifle economic development of the Northern Territory. For more than 30 years, the Act has been used to provide certainty and clarity for all parties and ensure that Indigenous heritage is protected while development is allowed to occur. It is not a tool to excise thousands of hectares of legally held pastoral leases without due process or just compensation. Today it appears that this is what a well-funded minority are hoping it can be used for. We currently have a member involved in an action brought against the NT government regarding their issuing of a clearing permit on pastoral land for the growing of fodder crops for cattle. We expect the government to fully and clearly provide support for the pastoral rights and the government's own rigorous systems and put these scurrilous claims to bed, setting precedent on the way. I'd like to talk about the referendum. If I asked everyone in this room whether they believed an Indigenous voice to Parliament would help address the challenges we face in the Territory, I could guess what the answer would be. But equally, if I asked the same people whether Indigenous disadvantage was something that must urgently be addressed using new ways of thinking, and that the answers of the past were no longer the solution of the future, I would know for certain what the answer would be. Around this country right now, there is a fear of discussing the voice to Parliament. There is a fear of asking questions about it, fear of being called racist. The fear of being judged bigoted or worse is very real. Of course, the problem is the left want to decide the agenda, and you may only speak if you agree with that agenda. Heaven forbid if you want to debate a topic to find the best outcome. You will be shut down. Luckily for me, the national broadcaster this year has already called the majority of us white supremacists. So I guess I am in the clear. In fact, because I am in a position to stick up for this industry, I've already been called bigoted, racist, homophobic, transphobic, elitist, prejudiced, destroyer of the environment, torturer of animals, discriminatory, biased, intolerant, chauvinistic, small-minded, old, grumpy and useless. Well, some of those last ones may have just been from Sue at home. At any rate, none of that worries me. What does worry me is this, that even in our attempts to further the discussion of this proposed amendment to the Constitution and the setting up of a body to run it, we will be ostracised. Now, I have been asked many times, what is the view of the NTCA regarding the voice? So on this matter, I want to be very clear with all of you here today. I do not believe it is the business or the role of the NTCA to express an opinion on this matter. So I will not be doing that today, save for these few comments. I believe it is the NTCA's role to ask questions of the government regarding the implementation of the voice, so that our members may be better informed. The NTCA will not advance an opinion on behalf of its members. This referendum brings with it a seismic shift in Australia as a nation. Regardless of which side prevails, the result will be recorded in the history books and taught to our children and our children's children in school. A referendum is a vote of the people, an expression of the will of the entire nation. I say that as I believe organisations do not have the right to speak on behalf of their people when it comes to protections that are afforded to all Australian citizens. We have the privilege of confidential voting in this country and the obligation of it being compulsory to do so. No one has the right to demand of another that confidentiality of which is protected and required by law. My earnest and truthful hope, whatever happens with the referendum, is that this renewed commitment to Indigenous disadvantage emergent over the past decade brings with it the change that is so desperately needed. Without it, if we are to continue down the road that we have been on for so long, without new ideas, without rights met equally, I fear the Territory will go backwards rather than grow. The other thing I know is the government has not provided me personally with enough simple information for me to be able to make an informed decision on this matter. I want to participate in this discussion. I have spent much of my life working alongside Indigenous people. I still do. I grew up with them and live alongside them. I still do. I want to know that this is something that will bring about real change or not. I want to understand it better and be part of this vital national discussion. Why is this so hard? Why do I feel that this is being done with stealth? I do know that this will endorse new rights based on race in the Constitution. And I was raised to believe that our Constitution should be blind to race, blind to religion, and blind to any political opinion. But that's my opinion only, and I might be wrong. But when I ask the hard questions, I fear being labelled as something I'm not. But we here in the NT know more than anyone the law of unintended consequences, and the simple case of feeling you may be doing the right thing for the warm flood of endorphins that may course through your veins is not how this law works. When Gough Whitlam poured the soil of the Victoria River District into Vincent Lingari's hands, he could not have perceived the unintended consequence that this would lead to. The unintended consequences are real. They are costly to us all, and we see the outcomes now, and they are usually brought about by well-meaning people who are not from here, do not know this land, do not know the people, and have no idea of the unintended consequences they will cause. I thought that splintering people out of mainstream Australia based on race is something we had learned as a country not to do, especially due to the potential of the unintended consequences I speak of. The NTCA does not ask your race, colour or gender when you fill out an application to join our association. What matters to us, to me, to you, is the commitment to your land, your animals, your people and your industry. We speak with experience on these matters. The Territory has borne the brunt of Indigenous policies championed by Canberra for years, and as the federal government has stumbled their way around a land different and distant from their own, so often our input and advice has been mostly ignored. In 1985, the very first president of the NTCA, Grant Heaslip, stated in the first ever presidential report to members that a lack of clear guidelines to determine which Indigenous persons were eligible to make land claims for community living areas would only result in tension and conflict, and that the NTCA would not support legislation or procedure that brought about hatred and contempt between two races who have lived together in this large multicultural society of the Northern Territory in harmony for so long. Then the second president, Mr. John Dyer, in both of his reports to members in 1988 and 1989, continued to call upon government to listen to the pastoral industry in the Territory, stating, whilst a negotiated outcome to the issues contained in the land rights legislation is now imminent, I wonder whether the best interests of those directly concerned have been met. He was referring to both Indigenous Australians and non-Indigenous alike, noting that it appears while politics may have been served, the people may not have been. In 1990, the third president of the association, Mr. John Underwood, expressed concern that excision negotiations for community living areas had become bogged down, and the tribunal appointed to make recommendations to the minister was also bogged to the axles, he stated. Our association is prepared at all times to support common sense discussions of living areas for needy peoples on pastoral leases. However, is the actual granting of excisions the solution? Our association is genuinely concerned about what is happening, or more precisely, what is not happening. We will still see some Aboriginal people living in atrocious conditions within these areas. Big John goes on to note that while significant amounts of money had been spent on the issue, the lot of Indigenous peoples appeared to be getting worse. Even with the purchase of 19 pastoral stations by ATSIC and their conversion to Indigenous freehold land, John warned of the unintended consequences of this, noting that not one of the purchased stations had been commercially viable in the preceding 20 years. In 1991, the NTCA would join in many voices calling for the ruling in Mabo to be legislated by the federal government. And then Mr. Underwood reported to members. He said, "My personal view is that Mabo decisions in the present political environment will become tied to reconciliation. Our association does not presently have a fixed position on reconciliation because we do not know what exactly the Prime Minister's Council might come up with." And then he went on to say, "We do know the word reconciliation means to bring back into harmony. Therefore, why do some continue to divide us into Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Australians? Why can't we all be Australians with equal rights?" Boy, does that sound familiar. I could go on reporting the words of the past. I could go on to talk about how Mr. Warrener, the fifth president, also warned about the structure and drafting of the native title legislation. He said it would lead to years of litigation and uncertainty on both sides of legal disputes. And he was right. I could go on and speak about my predecessor, Chris Knott, repeating the offer of co-investment, this time to the CLC, to assist in re-establishing pastoral enterprises across the Indigenous estate not more than 2 years ago in his address to the members, an offer that I am sad to say has remained mostly ignored. So let me add to this legacy by saying that even with the hundreds of billions of dollars that have been spent on public service programs, the establishment of new departments both in the Territory and in Canberra, the increasing focus on legal rights and recognition of Indigenous peoples nationally, the situation in the Territory appears to have gotten worse. We have the lowest unemployment rate in the country for Indigenous peoples and the highest incarceration rate. The region of Australia that has gone further than any other in protecting the legal rights of Indigenous people, in investing in them, has yielded the poorest results. And it appears we may now be running out of ideas. Last week, it was announced that all government departments in the Northern Territory would undergo reviews to determine whether they were systemically racist. While I am sure that will prove to be largely a waste of time, it did firm my resolve further. So I say, it is my belief that government is not, and will never be, the solution to addressing Indigenous disadvantage in the Territory. We've done a terrific job of making lawyers richer, but their clients remain in difficulty. To whom then should we turn? As I look around this room, it seems to me that it is going to have to be us. We must take a greater hand in improving this situation ourselves. And so to the Real Jobs program. For 13 years, we, the NTCA, have run a program in partnership with an Indigenous agency that has offered training and support to young Indigenous people to get jobs in the pastoral sector. The pastoral sector, you, our members, queued up to jump on board, as it is so well supported. The staff of the NTCA will go with these young people to stations and mentor them. If they are fencing, our staff are fencing. If they are in the yard sorting cattle, the staff of the NTCA are standing beside them. The station managers and the head stockmen and their staff mentor these young ringers. They trained them, worked with them, and lived with them. More than 200 participants have been through our program, with many still employed by the industry today. We loved the opportunity to mentor and work with these young Aboriginal stockmen and stockwomen. And last year, we lost our funding. Why? Well, we were told it was a strategic realignment and that there were other programs that were more important. Now we have kids all across the Territory calling our office asking when we will be recruiting for the program again. Community elders demanding we reinstate it. So here today, I will make this commitment. By this time next year, I will be standing before all of you reporting that we have a new program, and it's bigger than we previously had, better than what we previously had, and offers greater hope and opportunity than any other in the Territory. I make this commitment not just because I can, and not because it will be easy, because it is time for us to do so. We must take carriage of these programs ourselves. We will continue this program because we want it. Our members want it, but more importantly, these kids want it, and they need it. We have not, and we will not, give up on these kids. Aboriginal stockmen and women have a special place in our history, working alongside pastoralists in the building of the NT pastoral industry. The jobs gave them a purpose, and the purpose brought them pride. Pride in their job, their family, and themselves. The Indigenous pastoralists currently working their own land and cattle know all about this. The pastoral jobs held by these people were generational, handed down from grandfather to father to son. Every lad wanted to be a ringer and learn the skills that those who have gone before him had acquired. Pride has a flow-on effect to community and to a people. Many of these communities are now dysfunctional. Dysfunction comes from having no purpose, no pride. The result is boredom, alcoholism, crime and anarchy. The result is Alice Springs. Tennant Creek, Catherine, Palmerston, to just name a few places. Pride needs to be restored back to these people, and our pastoral industry is well situated to handle just that. In fact, we have been doing it for 150 years. I want to repeat the offer that myself, Chris Knott, and many NTCA presidents of the past have made to the Government of the Northern Territory. We are here to help. We can help. You have only to engage with us. Well, the list of issues faced by the NTCA is long and arduous, and I have spent more than enough time already today. I do not have the time to speak of roads, communications, bushfires, healthcare, education, biodiversity, carbon, diversification, wild dogs, buffel grass, etc. These are tough times and tough issues, and it takes tough and forthright people willing to tackle these issues on your behalf, the members of this association. Well, you have these very people representing you now. I want to thank the staff, led by Will Evans and Romy Carey, for not only their diligence, but their downright devotion to our business. This is a very capable team. I want to pay special attention to the executive team that voluntarily give of themselves to support the members around the board table. This also is a very capable crew, very supportive of the staff and their president. They have made some tough decisions and worked through issues seriously but amicably, and I commend the board for voting in favour last year to purchase a new office for the association and NTCA staff. This was not an easy thing to do, but the executive team handled this with aplomb and a great deal of professionalism. We now have a fantastic asset with room to grow with the business. There are more tough issues and more tough decisions to be made ahead. Not every member agrees with the leadership team all the time, but I can say with complete confidence that the executive always acts in the best interests of the members as a whole. I am very proud of the diversity that we have on the executive team, one that echoes the diversity within our industry. Cattlemen have never worried about your gender. We worry about whether you can ride, whether you can do the work, and you can do it safely. This is an industry where you are judged on your character, not gender, your commitment, not colour, and your ability, your integrity, not the breed of your cattle. We even listen to the Hereford breeders. This association will only ever be as good as the staff and the executive team that run it. So I implore you to get involved in your association. Bring your skills and your experience, your youthful enthusiasm, your passion and your ideas to the business. Join your branch executive and make a difference. I and this association are so supportive of the potential of the future NTCA. You young people can make a difference. Now is your time. Stand up, get involved, take part, contribute, be the difference. Again, I want to thank my great employer, Mr. Alan Myers, for his generosity in allowing me to devote work time to the NTCA. And lastly, but most importantly of all, I want to thank Sue for putting up with the phone calls and the time away and my ranting about the issues of the day that she so often has to listen to over and over. This is my last term in this position, and I pledge that I will once again give of my time freely as the presidents who have so ably gone before me have done, to advance and protect the interests of this great industry, to hold to account those who wish to do us and our industry harm. It is more important than ever to have a strong association to look out for your industry, your land, your animals and your people, because we're here for the long haul. Thank you.